A man in Colorado killed 10 people in a Boulder grocery store today. And if you're like me, you might be asking yourself why these atrocities happen and what we could be doing differently to protect innocent people. So, the first thing I want to talk about is that the patrons of the store should have been carrying guns. If you have a gun with you at all times and someone comes in and decides that they want to just do something horrible, like kill you or the person next to you, and you have a gun, you can end that person's life and protect people. Now, right now, there's a lot of people who are advocating that we need to be protecting other people, and they are saying that we should do that by wearing masks. Now, I can tell you that wearing a mask would not have protected anyone from those bullets. I'm sure everyone there was wearing masks. I don't know if the perpetrator was wearing one, but perhaps he was. But following the rationale of you need to protect other people, perhaps mask proponents should also be advocating for forced gun wielding. I wouldn't personally be a proponent, an advocate of that, but that would be consistent for them because a good person with a gun, yeah, so even the most lefty Democrat, if he has a gun and he's not a murderous psychopath, which some of them are not, he could use that gun in this kind of a situation to save the poor woman next to him. But they believe that the guns are the enemy, and so many of them choose to not carry a gun. But if they want to be consistent, they want to protect people, then they should, if they believe the mask works, great, wear the mask and have a gun because a gun's going to do a lot more in this kind of situation than a mask. So anyway, let's say that we're in the store now, the patrons are there. If they're able to take this gunman down, great. If not, obviously the police have been called and the police are going to be coming in to assist, and they're trained professionals. So more than likely, they're going to be able to subdue this criminal, this murderer, or dispatch him. And so in this case, that's what happened. They shot him in the leg, and so that they were able to take him into custody. Now, the way it should work is what they should do is immediately start to collect witnesses, get the recording from the closed circuit camera system in the grocery store, and begin looking for forensic evidence, any evidence they can get to convict. What they should do next is that they should take this murderer and their evidence not to booking, but directly before a judge. Now, the way that the process works right now, obviously, is we would put this person into booking, and he would await trial and probably continue it 16 times, and maybe in 18 months or so he'd have a trial. That makes no sense. The idea is due process, and due process isn't a bad thing. It's just that we have completely perverted what justice and due process should be. Due process should be gather evidence and make a true and good judgment. So what should happen is they should take all of this immediately before a judge. Now, juries are a neat thing. It's not a terrible idea to have a jury. The problem with a jury, though, is that there's no accountability. You're assembling a committee of random people who are going to pass judgment, and they're not to be held accountable if they make the wrong decision. Whereas a judge is a sole individual tasked with evaluating the evidence and coming to a conclusion. So rather than a jury, they should be brought. This murderer and all of the evidence, witnesses, should all be brought before a judge. The judge would review the testimony of the police officers, the witnesses, the camera evidence, the recording, and also interview the accused. And after reviewing all this information, the thing that occurs to me is it's likely that a lot of criminals, murderers, they would confess. You're taken directly from the scene of the crime, directly before a judge, with witnesses crying, standing there saying, "You just killed my mom. I saw you do it," with a recording showing you doing it, with other people testifying of it, with the blood on the ground. It would be indisputable. And human psychology is such that it's sort of hard for us to lie unless we're extremely practiced. It would be very difficult to stand before a judge with all of this happening and say, not guilty. And in my view, you wouldn't be allowed um, to remain silent. The judge is reviewing. I mean, of course, you can remain silent, but the judge is reviewing it, and he can pass judgment, of course, whether you remain silent or not. So it would be at least respectful for a person in this situation to admit, yes, I did it. And I feel that in this kind of an intense situation, you'd be much more likely to get a confession at that moment, rather than the person going through months or years of continuances and our current due process. So, at any rate, the judge would review everything and he would make a judgment. He would pass his verdict, and he would make his verdict. And so, at that moment, when the man is found guilty, now, if the judge can't come to a decision, if he doesn't feel he has enough evidence to convict, then he wouldn't. He would say, I cannot uh, I cannot find you guilty of this crime. So if there's not enough evidence, you need two witnesses to establish a matter. So if the judge has two or more witnesses and feels that the evidence is enough to convict, they will pass a guilty verdict. And then this man would be brought immediately to the stoning grounds, a location that would be designated for executions, with cameras ready for this to be televised, and the guilty would be brought there, and they would stand before this hole in the ground that they're about to be buried in, and they would be trembling. And that would be the proper response to the understanding of what they just perpetrated and the lives they just changed and ended and destroyed for what they did. So they'd stand there trembling, they'd be inserted into the hole, perhaps shoulder high, buried, and then the masses could gather. Executioners, family members would be welcome to attend, and they would have large rocks and boulders at the ready, and they would throw rocks and boulders at this man's head until it was obliterated and he was dead. And this, if anyone thinks that this is not a deterrent, it's because you're stupid. You've read studies, perhaps, that say some country somewhere does the death penalty, and oh, it doesn't deter crime. That is asinine, because right now our system is that if you murder 10 people, you get treated, you got shot in the leg, bummer, but you're going to go to the hospital. They're going to bandage that thing up for you. Then you're going to have 18 months of trying to get out of it, pretty much. We'll even give you a lawyer to help you. And then after that, if you are convicted, if you're unlucky and you're convicted, well, you're going to go to timeout for adults. We're going to put you in a cage like an animal. That's a little off. And like an animal or a pet, we're going to give you toys, we're going to give you entertainment, exercise, food, medical attention, and you're going to live like that for, some amount of years of the rest of your life. So if we're televising a group of people angrily obliterating a murderer's head, not only is that going to provide actual true justice, but it is going to be a real deterrent, which will protect would be victims. Now, is this going to mean that there will be no more murders? No. It's a deterrent, it's not an absolute defense. But this is a just deterrent that costs the taxpayers virtually nothing. So it's not only going to protect the would be victims, but it's also going to protect the would be murderers who are terrified at the thought of having their skulls crushed by an angry mob of people who are doing a just thing to them. So, really, the way the system works right now is encouraging people that if you want to do something insane and selfish, you could do it, and pretty much there's no real consequence. And the death penalty is obviously the ultimate consequence. So if we want to protect people from becoming murderers and we want to protect people from becoming victims, then this is the type of system we need to employ: a swift, painful, terrifying death penalty.